If I'm honest with myself, I can tell you that I used to hate reviews and I used to think they were a terrible thing to do. They were a waste of time. And anymore, I would take the opposite stance in saying that reviews are what keep the system actually worthwhile. And the reason I say that is because when you do a full review and you make sure that the system's up to date, that's what allows you to eventually start to trust the system, which we'll talk about later. But with these reviews, I do them on a very specific schedule, and I try to do them with no time constraints. And the reason I do that is because I know that keeping everything up to date and making sure I've got as much out of my head as I can, that's what allows me to be creative, and that's what allows me to get more done. And even though it may take, a few hours within a week to get everything reviewed at the cycles that I want to review them, even though I do that, there's still a lot of value in it because that's what gives me the clarity and the freedom of thought in order to continue doing the tasks that I want to do. And just so you can kind of see what that actually looks like, let's look at I do 4 main reviews, and I want to go through each of these and what the steps are to these, and just kind of explain how they all work in conjunction. So if we start at the very base level, every single day I do look through my system, and part of that, if we just go into this particular project, is just clearing inboxes. I have a handful of inboxes that I try to clear on a daily basis, and the reason I do that is because I don't want anything out of date. And for me, that means roughly daily. And I clear out my paper inbox. I've got an actual tray here in my office that I throw things into. Drafts on my phone sometimes collects things. Not very often, but it does on occasion. I try to clear out all the browser tabs I have open in all the different browsers that I use, just because I know that sometimes there are action items left, like I leave something up because I want to do something with it later. I'm better off collecting that as a task and saving the URL and coming back to it later. So I try to grab those where I can and process them appropriately. I have an inbox in Dropbox that collects all my files. I move them where they belong, put them in reference. Obviously, tasks within OmniFocus, I clear those out. I like to review the forecast perspective, and usually I'm looking at just a couple weeks out just to see what's going on within the forecast view, so I can see what's due, or is there anything deferred to specific days? Do I want to act on it on that day? Like, I just go through things in a very not specific way, but in a way that helps me see what's coming down the pipeline. I'll look at the calendar for today, what's on the hard landscape of everything I need to actually physically be at today. Hopefully that's not very much, otherwise I can't get a whole lot done. I do set a weekly plan of here are the 3 or 4 things that I want to get done this week. I review that daily so that I know here are the tasks and here are the things that I need to be working towards for the week, and what is it that I need to do in order to hit those goals. So I review that daily. And then I look at yesterday's work. What did I get done yesterday? And the reason I do that is it's kind of an interesting thing. It allows me to get the motivation to get going today. It's something about seeing a bunch of completed work that has progressed a project forward is something that allows me to get inspired to keep going today. And then once I've done that, I look through all of my contexts. I'll go through each context and look at all the items that are on those lists just to see, is there anything that I missed whenever I went through this yesterday? Is there something I need to act on today? If I've got things on a waiting list, do I need to do something to move them forward? Sometimes I have actions that were deferred in the past that I didn't get to today, and sometimes I have tasks that were deferred and I didn't get to them, so then they're sitting in the backlog. Well, they're available now. Maybe I need to flag them so that I can get to them today. But I just review those lists on a daily basis just to make sure I know what's available and continue working to getting those cleared off, even though I won't completely get them cleared off. So I do that every single morning. I go through that whole checklist every morning, and that's what allows me to keep everything clear and just on a very low level, keep everything up to date. And just so you understand, like, this is not a long process. I do this entire process in roughly 5 or 6 minutes. I mean, it's pretty fast. It's not something that's going to take a ton of time. Processing inboxes, if you're doing it every single day, it really doesn't take any time at all for me. And I'm always adding things to it, but it just seems like I go through them pretty quick. Looking over forecasts and calendars, it's kind of glancing just because you do this enough, you just kind of know what's coming up, and that's part of the reason and the power of doing it. And just glancing over things, it's pretty fast. So it's something that I'm more than comfortable doing every single day. If we step into the more traditional GTD review, we get this weekly review. And I have a number of things that I do here for, again, specific reasons. First off, I start by doing that daily review. Most of the time, by the point I get to doing my weekly review, I've already got that done. I just want to make sure that everything is cleared out mostly and that I've gone through all of those steps. So I'll just make sure that that's done. There is an inbox I have upstairs in our kitchen. My wife has a list that she will put things on for me, and I don't clear that one out daily just because she adds very few things to that. She's usually just mentioning things to me over breakfast in the morning, and I write them down in my own system. So that's how I usually get things from her. So there is a technical honey-do list in the kitchen, but she writes things on it that are really not important, and she'd just like them done at some point. So I only go through that once a week. Once I've got all of those completed, I go through the review perspective within OmniFocus, and I try to clear out everything in that review perspective. And the reason I can do that scheduled like this on the weekly review is because of the update review script, like what I have here in the toolbar. So I try to go through all of my projects that are set to a weekly review cycle. I go through all of those during that scheduled time, which is usually, I guess I didn't mention it, it's usually for me on a Friday morning. That's when I normally go through and do this checklist. Once I've gone through that review perspective, I go through my stalled projects, which if I did my review perspective correctly, should be empty. But I just want to make sure because on occasion I have a review cycle that's, say, every 2 or 3 weeks, and then that project gets stalled. So I want to make sure that I have no stalled projects in my system. And to go along with that, I do a mind sweep every week. And this is something that a lot of people I've seen don't do, but I like to make sure that I go through the full-on trigger list that David Allen provided in the book. I go through that whole list and make sure that nothing is missing. It's just a way for me to clear out my mind, and sometimes I can get through that whole list in about 10 minutes. I have had occasions where it takes me about 45 minutes to get through that list, and this is part of the reason that I try not to set an exact limit on how long it will take me to do this. So I just don't always know how long it'll take, but I do try to get that mind sweep done so that I can get everything out of my head. The next two in my calendar, I try to go over what happened the last 2 weeks. Sometimes I have client meetings, and whenever I look through my calendar, it will sometimes trigger a memory that I need to do something, or I just want to follow up with something that I didn't consider following up with in the past. I've just found some value in looking at what did I actually do in the past 2 weeks, and do I want to do anything about it in the future? So it's helpful to look through that. And then I look at what's coming up, what's going on in the next 2 months. And for me, I found that 2-month buffer is about right for me to get things like birthdays and anniversaries and holidays covered. So that 2-month buffer period works out really well for me. As I alluded to, I go through that weekly plan. I set that during my weekly review. So I'll set what's coming up in the next week, what I want to try to accomplish. Usually it's 3 to 4 goals that I'm shooting for, accomplish the recording of a certain number of videos or release something, different levels of goals that will usually tie back into my Horizon 3 monthly goals. So it usually ties back into those, but it is helpful for me to see what's going on in the upcoming week. So I go through that and set it during this weekly review. Once I have that plan for the week set, I reflect on what I just got done doing. And it's a simple text file that I maintain. I use NVAlt to keep track of those. And I just have a set list of questions that I ask myself to reflect on how did the past week go? Did it have everything? Did I accomplish everything I wanted to? What were a few things that I thought went really well? What were a few things I want to improve on? I've just found that it's extremely helpful to reflect on that and just to see how did it go. And then I close off this weekly review by cleaning everything up. Let's clear my desk, clear everything up, and empty the trash so that I am ready to go for the remainder of my Friday and the week ahead. And that's how I'll tie off my weekly review, just by making sure that everything is clean and ready to go and get myself set for whatever comes next. So once a month, I go through this monthly review, and it's very basic. It's not too complicated, but I do this at the first of every month. So if it's October 1st, I'll do it then. Sometimes it's not always the same day, so it does flux a little bit. Thankfully, with the way that I work and the way my schedule works out, I can do that. So it doesn't throw too big of a wrench into my process to do a monthly review. But all I do during that monthly review, it's very basic. I just make sure that my weekly review is completed. So sometimes I end up doing my weekly review a few days apart from each other. And I'm okay with that because it allows me to make sure that my longer term goals are met, and I just kind of look at things a little bit differently whenever I'm doing a monthly review. So it does take me through a lot of the same steps, but at the same time, it is a time when I'm looking at those same things with a little bit different colored lenses whenever I go through it. So I will go through that weekly review again, and then I just do some reevaluations just to make sure I'm doing what I intend to do. And I'll look through my contexts within OmniFocus. Do I have the right ones? Do I need to add one, subtract one? Can I consolidate a few? Do I need to expand one? I ask myself those questions and just try to make sure I've got the right context there. And then I go through my normal routines, what I do in the morning, what I do in the evening. Do I want to add to it? Do I want to pull from it? It's very basic stuff here. Same thing with my daily schedule. Do I want to continue working on my own stuff in the morning and clients in the afternoon? Do I want to adjust some of my week in some way or another? I just want to make sure that I'm thinking it through, and I've just found that making decisions about these intentions works out pretty well to do them about once a month. So that's why I tend to do it in that way. And then the last one on this list is this annual review. So in that, again, I'm doing the monthly review. You kind of see the pattern here of always doing the one below it. And then you can see I've got a few things that I go and I have a conversation with my wife about. And we do this roughly January 1st, sometimes a little bit before, sometimes a little bit after, sometimes it's March before we get them all done. But it's just something that we try to do about once a year. What did we do? What were the big things that happened last year? What are the big things we want to do this year? Do we want to do a family vacation? Do we want to do some big event, just the two of us? What are the big things that we want to try to do throughout the year? We think about our financial state. Do we have our savings in the right place? Are we investing in the right mutual funds? Do we want to buy property as an investment? Do we need to knock down some debt if we have it to pay off a mortgage? Those types of things we talk about and just make sure that we're on the right path. Because otherwise we've found that if we just leave it, we end up going down the wrong path and we just don't like where we end up. We'd rather be more intentional about where we go. And we do the same thing with insurance. We all have tons of insurance, it seems, between disability and long-term life insurance. You've got all your health insurance, typical car insurance, all those things. Sometimes we like to change the plans. We want to adjust which ones we hold, which ones we drop, and changing where they're at. We just want to make sure that we're making the right decisions and maintaining that. And due to a lot of the enrollment phases and cycles around January 1st seems to work out really well to have those conversations. And something we've started doing recently is monthly goals. And this is something I do specifically for me. It's not something I do for my wife. She does kind of her own. But I like to go through and say, okay, here are the next 12 months. What would I like to do? And this is where I usually try to evaluate my Horizon 3 goals and go through those and see if they're where I want them to be. But oftentimes I've just got one item per month and just kind of theme those months in the next year. So it's a little bit flexible as to what that actually means, but where it eventually lands is in that Horizon 3 project here within OmniFocus. But if you look at these 4 reviews, these are some that I have found extremely helpful to maintain. And again, they can take a decent amount of time, but as you can see as you go through each of these items, it just continues to build the trust in the system because you're constantly keeping it up to date and you're always reevaluating your overall goals and your missions and making sure that the tasks and projects that you have in place continue to work you towards where you want to go. And it helps you be intentional about what you're doing instead of haphazardly letting things happen to you. So I like to be more intentional with what I do, and that's part of the reason that I put these reviews in place and try to maintain them as best I can, because I know that that will eventually help me get to my end mission in life and help me accomplish what I want to instead of what I feel like is urgent. I'd rather accomplish the important stuff, and that's where these reviews really become handy.